Guy Fisher. Born in 1947, he grew up in the Patterson Projects in the South Bronx, a place where poverty and struggle was life. Home wasn't any better. His father battled alcoholism, gambled away what little money the family had, and on top of that was physically abusive to both Fisher and his mother. Being the oldest of 5 kids, Guy had no choice but to step into a protector role early on. That protective streak soon spilled out into the streets, where he got a reputation as a fighter. But fighting also came with consequences. One altercation landed him in Elmira Reformatory for juveniles on an assault charge. When he got out, Guy didn't bother finishing school. He dropped out and went straight to hustling, selling clothes out of the trunk of his car to get by. But the real turning point came when he crossed paths with Leroy Nicky Barnes. Barnes wasn't just another street hustler, he was Harlem's biggest drug kingpin at the time, infamous, feared, and respected. He saw something in Fisher, a young guy with brains, toughness, and ambition, and brought him into his world. By 1972, at only 25 years old, Guy Fisher wasn't just some street soldier, he was one of the 7 original members of the Council, a crew Barnes set up to function like the black version of the Mafia. The lineup included Barnes, Fisher, Joseph Jazz Hayden, Wallace Rice, Thomas Gaps Foreman, Ishmael Muhammad, and Frank James. Together, they pooled money, bought in bulk, set rules, and split profits. While Barnes loved the spotlight, dressing flashy and building a national reputation as Mr. Untouchable, Fisher had a different image on the streets. People knew him as the real godfather of Harlem. He gave back, hosting Thanksgiving turkey drives, organizing basketball tournaments, and trying to play the Robin Hood role while still stacking drug money. But it was his next move that made him a Harlem legend. By the mid-1970s, the iconic Apollo Theater had fallen on hard times. It was closed, and the heart of Harlem's cultural scene was about to flatline. Then, in 1978, a group of black businessmen swooped in and bought the place. Officially, their names are what history books mention, but the streets tell a different story. Guy Fisher was the real money man. He used about $250,000 of his drug profits to renovate and reopen the Apollo.
How does it feel to be here at the Apollo once again?
After 40 years of being here as the owner, how could I not feel nothing but very, very happy at this very moment?
Because of the heat that came with being in the drug game, Fisher couldn't put the property in his own name. Instead, he had his stepbrother, Elmer T. Morris, sign the mortgage. Behind the scenes, it was Guy pulling the strings, even hiring folks from his old projects to help with renovations. On May 6, 1978, the Apollo reopened with a bang. The show featured Gladys Knight, The Temptations, and other stars. Harlem celebrated, and Fisher's name, at least in street lore, was forever tied to saving the Apollo. But the same empire he helped build would be the one that tore him down. The Council lived by a code. Treat my brother as I treat myself. That code broke in the most dramatic way possible. While serving a life sentence, Nicky Barnes found out that Fisher was having an affair with his mistress, Beverly Shameka Ash. To Barnes, this was the ultimate betrayal. So he did the unthinkable. He turned informant. In 1982, Nicky testified against his own crew, Guy Fisher included. He even claimed that Fisher once shot a man so close the victim's clothes caught fire. The jury didn't buy that part, calling it hearsay, but they still nailed Fisher on running a continuing criminal enterprise. In 1983, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Guy Fisher, who had a brief affair with Barnes' former girlfriend, Shameka, was a member of that 7-man drug council, according to Barnes. Fisher is now serving life without parole after Barnes testified against him.
But prison didn't break him. Inside, Fisher reinvented himself. He became the first state or federal inmate to earn 4 academic degrees while behind bars, finishing with a PhD in sociology in 2008. He wrote 10 books, mentored young prisoners, and turned toward education and self-improvement instead of bitterness. After 38 years in October 2020, he finally caught a break. With his health failing, COVID spreading through prisons, and decades of proven rehabilitation behind him, a judge granted him compassionate release. Now free, Fisher is focused on telling his story the right way. He's working with producer Debbie Allen to bring his life to the screen. Nicky Barnes. He was Fisher's mentor, his big brother in the game, and ultimately the same man whose betrayal sent Fisher away for life. Nicky Barnes wasn't just a drug dealer, he was an innovator. He built a criminal organization so structured, so disciplined, and so profitable that people openly compared it to the Italian mafia. Barnes was born in Harlem on October 15, 1933. His early life was rough, an abusive, alcoholic father who beat on the family and set the tone for the chaos at home. By his teenage years, Nicky had already drifted into the streets. He was experimenting with heroin, eventually becoming addicted himself. But if his first lessons came from Harlem, his real education happened inside Greenhaven State Prison in the 1960s. Locked up, Barnes crossed paths with some heavy hitters. He learned from Colombo family mobster Crazy Joe Gallo and Lucchese family supplier Matthew Madonna. These weren't street corner hustlers, these were men who thought like businessmen. They saw in Barnes the perfect partner to expand their reach into Harlem, and Barnes saw in them the structure and discipline he needed to take his hustle to another level. When he got out, he took those lessons and applied them. In 1972, Barnes formed the Council, a 7-man board of Harlem's top dealers who would work together instead of tearing each other apart. They pooled resources, bought in bulk, set rules, and kept the profits flowing while cutting down on unnecessary violence. With direct pipeline to the Lucchese crime family, specifically Matthew Madonna, who supplied the raw product, the council was moving serious weight. By 1977, their operation was reportedly moving around $100 million worth of every single year.
Leroy Nicky Barnes, who for 7 years in the 1970s was godfather of the largest and most profitable selling operation in the history of New York City.
Barnes wasn't just making money, he was building an image. He became a full-blown celebrity gangster. He rocked hundreds of custom suits, drove luxury cars like they were rentals, and hit nightclubs with an entourage so large it felt like he was holding court. To make it even crazier, he openly taunted the cops who followed him around. He would pull stunts just to remind them that they couldn't touch him. Harlem called him Mr. Untouchable. But that ego would be his undoing. On June 5, 1977, Barnes did something no other kingpin of his caliber would dare do. He posed on the cover of the New York Times magazine. The headline read, "Mr. Untouchable." But instead of cementing his legend, it sealed his fate. The cover infuriated President Jimmy Carter, who personally told the Justice Department to do whatever it took to bring Barnes down. The full weight of the federal government came crashing down on him. After a 10-week trial, one that made history as the first to use an anonymous jury in U.S. history, Nicky Barnes was convicted in 1977. On January 19, 1978, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Just like that, Mr. Untouchable was behind bars for good. But prison didn't just lock him away. It broke the very code he used to live by. From his cell, Barnes found out that his so-called brothers had stopped paying his legal fees. Even worse, he learned that Guy Fisher, one of his closest allies, was sleeping with his mistress, Beverly Shemeka Ash. For Nicky, that was betrayal of the highest order. And if his brothers could turn on him, he figured he could turn on them. So Barnes did the unthinkable. He flipped. He became an informant, the very thing he once despised. He handed prosecutors a list of 109 names, everyone from his counsel partners to associates, even his own wife. His cooperation led to 44 indictments and the total collapse of the council.
It was while Barnes was in prison that he suspected that the 2 main women in his life were sleeping with his former business partners. How could he get even? Testify against his old pals, put them in prison.
For snitching, Barnes eventually got his freedom. In 1998, after 2 decades behind bars, he was released from prison and quietly slipped into the Witness Protection Program. From then on, he disappeared. He lived out the rest of his days in obscurity, and when he died of cancer in 2012, the world didn't even know. His death stayed secret for 7 years until 2019, when the news finally broke. Alpo Martinez. Alberto Alpo Martinez was born on June 8, 1966 in East Harlem in the East River Projects. His father wasn't in the picture, so the streets raised him. From young, he was already a risk-taker. At 13, while most kids were still thinking about bikes and ball, Alpo was running with his little crew, pulling off wild stunts. One of their favorite tricks was tossing trash cans off the bridge onto the FDR Drive, forcing traffic to stop. While drivers got out in shock, Alpo and his boys would creep along the barriers, snatch whatever they could from luxury cars, and disappear back into the projects. That rush, that feeling of danger mixed with reward, that's what hooked him. Soon, he leveled up. He started selling for a local hustler named Petaway. 13 years old, up before sunrise, posted on the block at 5 in the morning, slinging dope while grown men were still asleep. But Alpo wasn't built to play small roles. By the time he was 15, he felt done working for other people. The little hustles weren't enough. That's when he linked with Randy Love, a ruthless Harlem stick-up kid who schooled him in violence. Randy gave him a crash course. If you want to survive in this game, you gotta be ready to take what you want and defend it by any means. Alpo listened, he learned, and he developed a trick that played into his background. Being Puerto Rican with darker skin, people often thought he was black. He leaned into it. He'd walk into Colombian or Dominican stash spots pretending to be a small-time buyer. While they talked freely in Spanish, thinking he didn't understand, he'd be studying the room. Where the money was, where the drugs were stashed, how many people were inside. Later, he'd report back and his crew would come back masked and armed, clearing out the whole spot. He turned racial assumptions into a weapon, but robbing wasn't enough. He wanted status. He wanted the big leagues. That's when he crossed paths with Azie Faison, a young West Side hustler who was already making serious moves in Azie wasn't quick to trust him, but Rich Porter, Harlem's golden boy and Azie's close friend, vouched for Alpo while he was locked up. The stamp of approval changed everything. With Rich and Azie co-signing, Alpo stepped into a whole new lane. That trio became the stuff of Harlem legend. They were young, rich, and loud with it. Matching BMW convertibles, full Dapper Dan custom fits, the flyest jewelry, you name it. They had Harlem on lock, and their style influenced the entire city. Even rappers like LL Cool J copied their look. But Harlem was hot. Cops were watching, rival crews were plotting. So Alpo branched out. He set his sights on Washington, D.C., a city left wide open after a local kingpin, Rayful Edmond, got knocked in '89. Down there, Alpo found both opportunity and his most dangerous ally, Wayne Silk Perry. Perry was already a legend in D.C., known as the Michael Jordan of the murder game. Cold, calculated, and feared by everybody. Perry became Alpo's muscle, his protector, his enforcer. With Silk riding shotgun, Alpo's reign turned blood-soaked. The stories from that era are chilling. Demencio Montana Benson, a Brooklyn kingpin, was suspected of plotting against Alpo. Instead of handling it in secret, Alpo staged it in the open. At a packed basketball tournament, he walked up, shook Benson's hand, and in that moment, it was the signal. One of Perry's shooters, Shorty Pop, came out of nowhere and shot Benson point-blank in the forehead, in front of hundreds of people. Then there was Michael Frey Salters, an old-school DC hustler with a reputation for extorting Perry back in the day. Word got to Alpo that Salters had a hit list with his name on it. That was enough. He flipped Salters' own right-hand man, Michael Jackson, paying him $10,000 cash and a kilo of coke to take his boss out. Salters never saw it coming. And it didn't stop at men. Alveda Hopkins, a young woman brave enough to testify against Perry in a murder case, found herself in the wrong side of their code. She was kidnapped, tossed into a van driven by Alpo. As NWA's Abiz Abi blasted from the stereo, Perry stabbed her in the chest, then finished her with a bullet to the head before dumping the body. But the move that forever defined Alpo wasn't in DC. It was in Harlem. It was the betrayal of his closest friend, Rich Porter. December 1989 was already hell for Rich. His little brother, 12-year-old Donnell, had been kidnapped on his way to school. The culprits were the Notorious Preacher crew, with the whole thing secretly orchestrated by Rich's own uncle, John Apple Porter. They demanded $500,000 ransom. To prove they weren't bluffing, they sent Rich a coffee can with his little brother's severed finger inside, along with a recording of Donnell begging for his life. Desperate, Rich turned to his connect, Richard Fritz Simmons, who fronted him 30 kilos on faith to raise the money. But with the feds crawling all over Harlem because of the kidnapping, moving that much weight was almost impossible. Out of options, Rich called Alpo in DC, hoping his partner could help. But instead of help, he got betrayal. Alpo later claimed Rich had been playing him, secretly overcharging him for coke. He said Rich lied straight to his face, and that was the breaking point. The streets say it was greed. Rich had 30 bricks and Alpo wanted them. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. On January 3, 1990, Alpo lured Rich into a car with his associate, Big Head Gary Terrell. Gary pulled the trigger first, shooting Rich twice in the head. Alpo finished it himself, firing the final shot before dumping his childhood friend's body near Orchard Beach in the Bronx. Later, Alpo shrugged it off. It wasn't personal, it was business.
I was asking him, because it didn't take long after I pulled off, I was asking him like, yo, Rich, where did you get that coat from, man? That shit was good, because I wanted to make him comfortable. That shit was good as He's like, I got it from my connect. From there, I knew he was lying. I turned to my little man. I gave him the nod. Once I gave him the nod, my little man spent, because he was short, so he could stand up in the van. Next thing you heard was the 2 gunshots, bang, bang.
By 1991, Alpo's empire caught up with him. On November 7th, he was arrested in D.C., staring at 14 murder charges and the death penalty. The same man who once embodied the streets made the move nobody expected. He flipped. He cooperated with the feds. His most damaging testimony was against Silk Perry, exposing their entire reign of violence. Perry ended up with 5 consecutive life sentences. Alpo got a deal, 35 years. He walked out in 2015, entering witness protection under the name Abraham Rodriguez, settling in Lewiston, Maine. But Alpo couldn't hide who he was. He was an attention junkie. By 2017, he was back in Harlem, showing off on motorcycles, giving interviews, even defending his decision to snitch by saying there's no code to the streets. He wanted the spotlight, even if it meant risking his life. And the streets didn't forget. On Halloween night 2021, at 3:30 a.m., Alpo was in Harlem, driving his Dodge Ram truck. Shots rang out. He was hit 5 times, killed instantly. As he lay dying, his truck crashed, and witnesses said he was tossing baggies of out the window, trying to get rid of evidence with his last breaths. The irony couldn't have been sharper. Rich Porter's niece said it best. Every dog has their day, and today was his. Frank Matthews. Before the crack era, there was Frank Matthews. The streets called him Black Caesar. He was born on February 13, 1944 in Durham, North Carolina, a segregated southern town where opportunities for a young black boy were slim. Life hit him hard early. His mother passed when he was only 4 years old, and he ended up being raised by his aunt. She was married to a local police lieutenant, so technically Frank had law and order inside the house. Outside though, the streets called louder. By the time he was 14, he was leading. Matthews put together a little gang that specialized in stealing chickens from farms. It sounds small, almost funny, but it was the kind of hustle that showed he had leadership and nerve. That nerve turned into trouble fast. One day, he and his crew assaulted a farmer, and Frank got caught. The charge landed him in a state reformatory for a year, his first taste of confinement. When he came out, the South felt too small. He drifted first to Philadelphia, then to Brooklyn, New York, specifically Bedford-Stuyvesant. Brooklyn in the 60s was a whole different world. Frank cut hair as a barber for a while, but the real money was in the streets. He dipped into the numbers racket, the underground lottery that was Harlem and Brooklyn's bread and butter back then. That's where he started brushing shoulders with serious players, guys like Major Coxon out of Jersey and members of the Black Mafia. Those connections planted the seeds for what was coming. By 1965, Frank wanted more. Numbers was steady money, but he was ambitious. He wanted the kind of empire that couldn't be ignored. So he turned to drugs. His first stop was the Italian families, the Gambinos, the Bonanos, because at that time, the mob controlled the pipeline. But when Frank came knocking, they turned him away. No deal. That rejection might have been the best thing that happened to him because instead of being just another black lieutenant under the mob, Frank decided to go independent, and that's when luck stepped in. Through a Harlem numbers band named Spanish Raymond Marquez, Frank was introduced to a Cuban supplier named Rolando Gonzalez Nunez. Rolando wasn't just anybody. He had ties to the Corsican Mafia, the same network behind the infamous French Connection. That was Frank's golden ticket. Rolando sold him his first kilo of for $20,000, then fled to Venezuela, promising there'd be more. And with that single kilo, Frank started building his empire. And what an empire it was. By the early 70s, Matthews had operations in 21 states, stretching from Boston all the way down to Alabama. That's coast-to-coast domination in an era when most hustlers barely made it out of their borough. One of his rules was simple but powerful. He only worked with black and Hispanic dealers. In Brooklyn, he ran fortified drug mills so big they had nicknames like the Ponderosa and the OK Corral. These weren't backroom cutting spots. They were industrial-level operations guarded by men with automatic weapons. Money flowed like water. To clean it, he funneled millions through Las Vegas casinos, paying steep fees, 15, even 18%, to make it disappear. According to the IRS, in 1971 alone, Frank Matthews pulled in $100 million. That's bigger than Lucas, bigger than a lot of the mafia crews combined.
There's been a lot of recent movies on Lucas being the king of drugs. That's not true. And Matthews was the #1 heroin pioneer.
But money wasn't enough. Frank had vision. He didn't just want to be a kingpin, he wanted to build a dynasty. In 1971, he organized a sit-down in Atlanta, bringing together the biggest black and Hispanic in the country. A year later, he held another summit in Las Vegas. The purpose was bold and clear: to break the mafia's monopoly on the international drug trade and form their own syndicate, a black and brown cartel coast to coast. Nobody else at that time was even thinking on that scale.
Was extremely bright, had good leadership skills, and had convened a meeting of all of the top African American and Hispanic drug dealers in Atlanta, Georgia, in 1971.
For a while, Frank seemed untouchable. He lived large but not too flashy, and he stayed just under the radar. But eventually, paranoia from the streets gave way to suspicion from the law. It started with something small: a New York detective who happened to live in Frank's Brooklyn neighborhood. He noticed all the strange traffic, the steady flow of luxury cars, men carrying big paper bags in and out of Frank's place. He got curious, put in for surveillance, and by June of 1972, the cops had Frank's phones tapped. One thing led to another, and soon his Miami connect got arrested. That guy folded, giving the feds the link they needed. In January 1973, federal agents finally made their move. They grabbed Frank and his girlfriend Cheryl Denise Brown at an airport in Las Vegas. The case was massive. His bail was set at $5 million, the highest in American history at the time. A judge later reduced it to $325,000, but even that was heavy. Still, Frank paid it. And then came the twist that turned him from kingpin to legend. On July 2, 1973, Frank Matthews was supposed to appear in a Brooklyn courthouse. The courtroom was ready. The feds were confident, but Frank never showed. He and Cheryl vanished, just like that. Gone, with an estimated $20 million in laundered cash. A month later, the IRS got a tip he was back in North Carolina. They rushed to the bank where he supposedly showed up. The manager looked at them and said, "Oh, you just missed him." That was the last solid lead anyone ever had. Since then, nothing. No fingerprints, no sightings, no calls to family. The DEA put up a $20,000 reward, the biggest since John Dillinger. The U.S. Marshals kept the case open for decades. Still, nothing. Frank Matthews became a ghost. Theories flooded in. Some say he took his money and escaped to Africa, maybe Nigeria or the Ivory Coast. Others think he hid out in the Bahamas. Some whisper the mafia finally caught him, lured him to an island, and killed him for disrespecting their order, especially after he once kidnapped one of their associates over a deal gone bad. The wildest theory was that the Corsican Mafia, or even the CIA, took him out because Frank's independent pipeline disrupted their global network. Kenneth Supreme McGriff. He was born in 1960 and raised in the Baisley Park housing projects in South Jamaica, Queens. His parents were transit workers, solid middle-class folks trying to raise their kids right. But like a lot of stories from that time, the environment around him was heavy. Poverty, gangs, drugs, it was all right outside the door. By junior high, Kenneth was already gravitating towards something different. That's when he got exposed to the 5% Nation, a movement that taught self-knowledge, discipline, and that a chosen few were destined to lead. From that world, he picked up the righteous name Supreme, and he would carry it into the streets as if it were prophecy. By the early 80s, crack had started to sweep through New York, and Supreme saw an opening. He put together what would later become one of the most infamous crews of that era, the Supreme Team. This wasn't just a ragtag bunch of corner hustlers. Supreme structured it like a corporation. His nephew, Gerald Prince Miller, who was feared for his ruthlessness, served as second in command. They had rooftop lookouts with walkie-talkies. They had dealers working shifts. They even used color-coded vials, yellow, red, orange, blue, each set tied to a lieutenant's operation. By 1987, the crew was pulling in staggering numbers, reportedly up to $200,000 a day. But what made Supreme different wasn't just the money or the structure, it was the way he played the role of both kingpin and community leader. In the projects, people saw him as a Robin Hood figure. He funded basketball tournaments, threw huge block parties, and passed out turkeys on Thanksgiving. He had one famous rule: no singles, no shorts. Basically, his dealers didn't take $1 bills and nobody could come up short on payment. Word was he hated singles so much he'd literally give away stacks of them to kids in the neighborhood every day. At the same time, hip-hop was exploding out of Queens, and Supreme, always aware of his image, was one of the first to invest in the culture. He was booking Run DMC, LL Cool J, and other rising stars for parties, paying them $1,000 a night. The rappers picked up on his style, his fashion, his aura. The way he carried himself started showing up in their lyrics, their attitude. That's when the line between the street and the music really started to blur, and Supreme was standing right there in the middle, influencing both worlds. But power like that never lasts forever. In 1987, the law caught up with him. He was arrested on a continuing criminal enterprise charge, basically a kingpin law meant to put people like him away for decades. While he was gone, Prince took over and ruled with an even heavier hand, ordering multiple murders in 1 year alone. When Supreme finally got out in the mid-90s, he wanted to flip the script. He opened a barbershop and even stepped into entertainment, producing a straight-to-video movie called Crime Partners. Then came his partnership with Irv Gotti. Irv, another Queens native, was on his way to building one of the biggest labels in hip-hop, Murder Inc. Supreme allegedly bankrolled some of it, with the feds later claiming he used the label to launder millions in drug money. Whether true or not, the connection tied him directly to the industry in a new way. But it also put him right back under federal surveillance. The real turning point came from 50 Cent. When 50 dropped Ghetto Quran, he broke an unwritten street rule. He named names. He rapped about Supreme and Prince directly, painting Supreme as the businessman and Prince as the killer. That was too much. In May 2000, 50 was ambushed outside his grandmother's house and shot 9 times. He survived, but the streets and later the authorities linked the attempt back to Supreme, with whispers of a $50,000 hit on the rapper's head.
My issue was with Preem. You see what I'm saying? He's from my neighborhood. He understands the difference. So he'll look at it and go, he's gonna do something. You don't have to address a rapper with killing him. We're shooting him now, you know what I'm saying, 9 times.
Supreme's personal vendettas also fueled his downfall. His right-hand man, Black Just, was killed in 1999, and Supreme allegedly wanted blood in return. In 2001, rapper E Moneybags, who was tied to that beef, was ambushed in his truck and sprayed with over 40 bullets. The word on the street was that the whole thing was videotaped and sent to Supreme, who supposedly bragged, "Black Just can finally rest in peace." Months later, another associate connected to Bags was also murdered to cut off any retaliation. By then, the feds had more than enough. In 2003, they raided Murder Inc.'s offices. Irv and his brother beat their money laundering case, but Supreme wasn't so lucky. In 2007, a jury convicted him of murder conspiracy, drug and racketeering. His sentence, life in prison without parole. Supreme's story is a cautionary tale. Jay-Z once said he tried to pull him out of the game, rapping, "I put Preem in my truck, told him leave them streets alone." But the street had too much of a grip. Frank Lucas. Long before Hollywood showed up with cameras and scripts, Frank was already spinning a narrative about himself. He was born on September 9, 1930 in LaGrange, North Carolina. He grew up dirt poor in the South, the kind of poverty where every day was survival. Later in life, he'd tell one of the most dramatic stories about his childhood, that he watched the Ku Klux Klan murder his 12-year-old cousin just for looking at a white woman.
And murder my cousin. He's 15 years old. And you know what they murdered him for? They murdered him for break his eyeball.
He swore that moment hardened him forever and pushed him toward crime, but investigators later said they could never verify it. Real or not, by his teens, Frank was already restless, already hustling, and after a violent clash with an employer, he fled north to Harlem. Harlem in the 1940s and 50s was a world all its own. For a country kid, it was a mix of danger, opportunity, and temptation. Lucas fell headfirst into the street game, pool hustling, petty robberies, scams, anything to get money. But what really made him a household name was his supposed connection to Harlem's most respected boss, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, According to Frank, he wasn't just an errand boy or a hanger-on. He said he was Bumpy's driver, his right-hand man, his protege for 15 years, and when Bumpy died in 1968, Frank claimed the torch was passed to him, like a crown being handed from king to king. That sounds neat, but here's the problem. Bumpy's own widow, Mamie Johnson, called it complete nonsense. She said Lucas was never a protege, never the heir to Bumpy's throne, and that he was little more than a flunky. To make matters worse for Frank's version, Bumpy spent 11 of those 15 supposed years locked up in Alcatraz. The timeline doesn't add up. Some say Lucas stole another hustler story, one named Zach Walker, and made it his own. After Bumpy's death, whether he was mentored or not, Lucas made his move. He saw the trade as the fastest road to riches, and he came up with a strategy. Cut out the mafia middlemen and go directly to the source. That source was the Golden Triangle, the infamous region in Southeast Asia where some of the world's purest was produced. This is where Frank's most infamous claim comes in, the cadaver connection. He bragged that he had coffins specially built with false bottoms, that he smuggled heroin back to the US inside the caskets of dead American soldiers being flown home from Vietnam. It was a wild story and it captured the imagination of the public, but like much of Lucas's life, it doesn't quite check out. The DEA, the judge who presided over his case, and even Leslie Ike Atkinson, the US Army Master Sergeant who actually ran the Thailand operation, all called the coffin story a lie. Ike said Lucas exaggerated, that the real smuggling happened through hollowed-out furniture and other tricks, and that Frank wasn't his partner but just one of his many customers in New York. What isn't up for debate is the quality of Lucas's product. His sold under the brand name Blue Magic was nearly pure, cut to around 10% when most other dealers were selling garbage, stepped on to 3 or 5%. People lined up for it. His operation flooded New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, even beyond. He was making millions and he flaunted it. Lucas loved the spotlight. The moment that sealed his fate came in 1971. He showed up to the fight of the century, Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, wearing a $100,000 chinchilla coat with a matching $25,000 hat. That one outfit basically put a bullseye on his back. Up until then, he had kept a relatively low profile, but that night, the DEA and NYPD clocked him. They didn't know his name yet, but they knew they were looking at somebody big. From there, law enforcement started piecing together the puzzle. In 1975, they raided his mansion in Teaneck, New Jersey. Officially, they found about $585,000 in cash stashed in his house. Lucas later swore it was closer to $11 million and that most of it was stolen by the cops. Whatever the number, it was enough to put him away. In 1976, he was convicted and sentenced to 70 years behind bars. And just like the rest, Lucas flipped. He gave up names, over 100 of them, including drug associates and dirty cops. His cooperation took down a big chunk of the world and exposed deep corruption in law enforcement. In return, his 17-year sentence was slashed, and he was back on the streets by 1981 after just 5 years. Of course, later he denied it, swearing he never snitched, but the paperwork said otherwise. Freedom didn't change him much. By 1984, he was right back in the drug game, and right back in prison again, this time for another 7 years. When he got out in 1991, the streets had changed. The crack era was in full swing, the players were younger, hungrier, and more violent. The old heroin didn't fit anymore, and Lucas quietly faded out of the game. Then came the second act of his life, Hollywood. In 2000, a New York Magazine profile reignited his story, catching the eye of filmmakers. By 2007, the movie American Gangster hit theaters with Denzel Washington playing Frank Lucas. The movie cemented his legend, even though the judge who had sentenced him years earlier dismissed most of it as 1% reality and 99% Hollywood. But for Lucas, it didn't matter. He had always been a storyteller, and now his story was immortalized. Frank Lucas died in 2019 at the age of 88. Azie Faison. Out of the 3 kings who ran Harlem during the crack era, he is the only one still here to tell the story. He was born on November 10, 1964 in the Bronx. Life wasn't easy from the start. When he was 6 years old, a fire destroyed his family's apartment and they had to relocate to Harlem's Sugar Hill. 9 people, his parents and 7 siblings, squeezed into a tiny one-bedroom. They survived on public assistance, and for Azie, the world always felt like it was against him. School wasn't his thing. He dropped out in 9th grade and picked up a job at Junior's Dry Cleaners, working long hours just to bring home $75 a week. Then came the spark that lit a fire in the entire generation of hustlers: Scarface. When the film hit theaters in 1983, Tony Montana's rise from nothing to absolute power hit Azie like a lightning bolt. Here was a man who came from the gutter, who clawed his way up, who wanted it all. Azie walked out of that theater seeing himself in Tony, and not long after, life gave him his own opening. It happened at the Dry Cleaners. A Dominican customer named Lulu, who would become his supplier, left in his pants pocket. Azie found it, gave it back, and Lulu, impressed by the honesty, told him to keep it. Most people wouldn't know what to do with that. Azie flipped it into what he later called an accidental stroke of genius. At the time, half grams were going for $100. He sold his for $50. Word spread instantly. Within days, Azie went from a dry cleaning clerk to Harlem's newest name on the streets. From there, the money poured in. He opened the Green Door, an after-hours spot that brought in over $50,000 a week. Then came his real masterpiece, the Jukebox, a storefront filled with arcade games. On the surface, it looked like a kid's paradise. In reality, it was one of the slickest fronts in the city. He pushed his signature $10 vials, GP35s, through the spot, and he stashed cash in the game machines. The place was pulling in hundreds of thousands of dollars every week. Harlem had seen hustlers before, but Azie's setup was something different. With his name ringing out, a young hustler from East Harlem stepped to him after a basketball game at Rucker Park. His name was Alpo Martinez. Azie was cautious. He didn't like outsiders in his circle, but his right-hand man, Rich Porter, was locked up in the Bronx House Detention Center. Azie called him and asked his opinion. Rich vouched for Alpo, and that was enough. Just like that, the trio was formed. They became Harlem legends. Rich and Alpo were flashy, dripping in Dapper Dan, sliding through Harlem in matching BMWs. Azie stayed in the background, the thinker, the one moving pieces like a chess player while the others played checkers. But in the drug game, every blessing comes with a curse. On August 21st, 1987, Azie paid his price. His stash house, a Bronx apartment that belonged to his aunt, Joanne Blue, was hit in a robbery. It wasn't just a robbery, it was a massacre. 6 people were shot at close range. 3 died, including his aunt. Azie himself was hit 9 times, twice in the head, and left for dead. Miraculously, he survived. Lying in the hospital, weak but alive, Azie realized the deepest cut wasn't just the bullets, it was betrayal. He recognized one of the robbers' voices. It was Kevin Clark, his sister's boyfriend. Azie had looked out for Clark. He gave him a convertible Saab, $15,000 in cash, and even a block that was moving a kilo a week. Clark was eating good, but envy is a poison. He wanted more, and he was willing to kill for it. That night changed Azie. The glamour of the game, the Scarface dreams, all of it started to fade.
And it was an incident where he wanted me to give, before he got locked up, he had wanted me to give some drugs to Rich. And I didn't. I gave it back to my sister, and I told him to give it back to him because I felt that dude was crazy, because the way, the situation at that time, he was running from somebody.
3 years later, when Rich Porter was murdered, the final piece of the trio was gone, and Azie knew it was time to walk away. He told people the feds were closing in, but the truth was, his spirit was broken. He had survived what most men didn't. He had seen loyalty crumble, money burn, and friends die. He wasn't chasing the dream anymore. So he stepped back, but Azie didn't just disappear, he reinvented himself. He started telling the story not to glorify it, but to warn people not to repeat the same cycle. He formed the conscious rap group Mob Style, spitting reality instead of fantasies. And most importantly, he wrote the screenplay that became the cult classic Paid in Full. The movie turned the saga of him, Rich, and Alpo into a permanent part of street history. But Azie made sure the message was clear. It wasn't a roadmap to glory. It was a warning. As he famously said, "Don't try to repeat Paid in Full the way we repeated Scarface." Rich Porter. If Harlem had a poster boy for style, flash, and ambition in the 1980s, it was Rich Porter. Long before Harlem Fly was even a phrase, he embodied it. The custom cars, the icy jewelry, the tailor-made Dapper Dan fits, Rich was the blueprint. Rappers like LL Cool J and the early hip-hop wave would eventually make that aesthetic mainstream, but Rich was already living in it. Cops might have described him as a mid-level drug dealer moving around $50,000 worth of crack every week, but in the eyes of Harlem, he was more than that. He was an icon. The streets crowned him Money Rich. He was born Richard Thomas Porter on July 26, 1965, and jumped into the streets early. By 12 years old, while most kids were still figuring out middle school, Rich was already hustling. People couldn't believe the lifestyle he was living. Rumors swirled that he never wore the same outfit twice. He had a garage in Manhattan stacked with luxury cars, including his prized possession, a sleek black BMW 528e, which he drove as a teenager. His first big partner in the game was his right-hand man, L.A. Together, they were inseparable, a dynamic duo running the Harlem streets. But in 1984, everything changed. One night, outside the Rooftop, one of Harlem's hottest nightclubs, L.A. was gunned down. The shooters weren't even after L.A., they were after Rich. That brush with death rattled him, but it didn't stop him. Not long after, Rich himself survived another ambush. This time, a bulletproof vest saved his life. Still, he ended up catching a gun charge in the shootout, and it landed him on Rikers Island for a year. When he came home, his circle, Azie and Alpo, helped him get back on his feet. They gifted him a Saab 9000, some cash, and a kilo of to restart. Rich being rich, he turned that opportunity into a bigger empire. The key to his rise was his connection to Richard Fritz Simmons, a quiet Harlem supplier who moved in silence but had serious power. Fritz had ties to the Lucchese crime family, and he controlled an almost unlimited pipeline of product. With Fritz behind him, Rich could keep his operation flooded without worrying about running dry. That relationship made him one of the biggest young players in the city. But success in the drug game is always temporary, and for Rich, the fall came fast and brutally. On December 5, 1989, his 12-year-old brother Donnell was kidnapped on his way to school. The kidnappers demanded a $500,000 ransom. To prove they weren't bluffing, they sent a coffee can to a McDonald's on 125th and Broadway. Inside was one of the darkest messages Harlem had ever seen. Donnell's severed finger, along with a cassette tape of the terrified boy begging for his life.
And they wanted how much? Like $500,000 or something?
Yeah, that's what it was stated to have been.
And then to show that they were serious, they actually cut off his little brother's
the very
finger.
next day, McDonald's on Broadway and 125th Street, and called his house and said there's something to go look, and he sent somebody over there, and that's what they came back with.
The mastermind behind the crime was his own uncle, Johnny Apple Porter. Apple was tied to Clarence Preacher Headley's extortion crew, one of the most feared and violent outfits in Harlem. Desperate to save his little brother, Rich went to the only man who could help him, Fritz Simmons. Fritz fronted him 30 kilos of trusting him to turn it into the ransom money. But with Harlem swarming with federal agents because of the kidnapping, moving that much product became nearly impossible. Out of options, Rich reached out to Alpo Martinez, asking for help. That call sealed his fate. On January 3, 1990, Rich got into a car with Alpo and Alpo's associate, Big Head Gary Terrell. They thought they were riding to figure out a way to raise the ransom. Instead, Alpo gave the order. Rich was shot multiple times in the head. The next day, his body was found near Orchard Beach in the Bronx, still carrying $2,239 in his pocket. And the nightmare didn't end there. Less than a month later, on January 28, 1990, Donnell's dismembered body was discovered not far from where Rich was found. Rich Porter's name lived on. He was immortalized by Mekhi Phifer and Paid in Full, and his legacy runs through countless rap lyrics, from Jay-Z to Cameron.